Thank you everybody for joining us today. So we are, Stephanie and I are here. We are excited to talk about home rule. If you've listened to anything during my campaign, you know that I am a broken record on home rule, and I have been talking about it nonstop, probably annoying everyone around me for about 6 months about it. But that is a measure of how just important I think that it is, and I know how important that Stephanie is also convinced that it is. So we are so happy that you are here to join us today. First, Stephanie, you want to say a little bit about our district and who we represent?
Sure. So I am one of your elected county board members for District 8, and Emily recently overwhelmingly won her primary for District 8 and will be running on the November ballot, as far as we know, unopposed. So we, after November, will be serving on the board together to represent District 8. So just to give you a sense of where District 8 is, I always like to say it looks like a puppy. There's a little head and like 2 little legs. It's predominantly in the more historic part of near downtown Champaign in the Sesquicentennial neighborhood, and then a lot of campus and student housing. So we are sort of right in the middle there. Just to give you a little bit background on myself, I am the deputy finance chair for the county board, and I also serve on the Environment and Land Use Committee. So that's just a little background on us and our district, so you kind of know where we're coming from and why the county framework is the framework that we're talking about today.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm a teacher, and I apologize for these tics that I just cannot seem to control, but here we have a preview for what's coming up in this presentation. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about what home rule is. It's a legal principle. We're going to get into the weeds a little bit on what it means and how we can use it. Next, we're going to talk about why do we want home rule now? So why is it so important that we get it on the 2020 ballot? Next, we're going to get you guys into breakout rooms. If you'll just bear with us. We know that that can feel intimidating, but we feel that it's really important to get a conversation started here. So we can look our neighbors in the eye and start to discuss what problems that we're seeing. And then finally, this is not on the slides, we're going to give an opportunity for you to ask questions. So you can see in the chat that I've offered an option to submit questions through the forum. You can also, of course, say your question in person whenever we get to that segment. And then finally, we're going to do a quick call to action. So just a quick preface. We are going to try to save questions on specifics for how this would look politically, how do we advance this petition drive, etc. We're going to try to save that for another forum, just to keep us really on target. Any questions on the format and how we're moving forward here? Okay, we can get rolling then. Okay, so first, let's start with our first order of business, and that is, what exactly is home rule? So the basic things that local government can do are first distribute tax dollars. They can also raise funds, and they also decide how we want to tax things. So who gets what, how much, and when. Those are the basic things that local government does. Home rule is a legal principle that allows a home rule unit, a locality, to self-govern. And that gives us three additional options that are currently less available to us now. The first one is that we get to strengthen the regulatory powers of local government to promote, if we so choose, specific to our county, a more equitable future. And Stephanie's going to talk about what that could mean for our environment specifically. The next one, it would lift restrictions on how we can use our budget. This is one that I'm really excited about. So often you're going to hear that home rule might, or that it would make us, that it would come with higher taxes, but this is just the opposite. If we have home rule, we can lift restrictions on how we choose to invest the tax dollars that we already have. We wouldn't need to push things through on a referendum every single time. Instead, we could have open participation. People could come in and speak on that option immediately and get immediate results, which is going to be so important as we respond to this pandemic. And then finally, this is another one that I'm really excited about. This would open possibilities to set new revenue streams. So quote that I say often, I'm kind of on the Dolly Levi, hello Dolly kick. So to put this in her terms, tax dollars are like manure, and it's only worth anything. It's only good if we can spread it around to make things grow. So we can carve out new revenue streams that we could invest in areas of our community that are hurting most. It will allow us to tax in a non-draconian fashion, right? We wouldn't be limited to that blunt instrument of property taxes. Instead, we could set up new revenue streams. So like an innocuous example would be plastic bags. Other areas have implemented a plastic bag tax, 5 cents, 2 cents, etc. It's an easy way to raise funds. It isn't gonna, kneecap businesses like Hopscotch Bakery, which everybody knows I stand for. Okay, so let's look a little bit about what exactly the Illinois Constitution allows us to do as a home rule unit. This is the snippet, and it's really important that we go over the snippet because what you are looking at right now is some of the widest, broadest, and most powerful powers that are given to a home rule unit of any state in the nation. We are uniquely positioned to go to bat for our community, to protect our community members and our neighbors from the worst of the epidemic because of this bit in our Constitution. So in 1970 was the last time we rewrote our Constitution, and in that, it allowed localities, so municipalities, meaning towns and cities, so Urbana and Champaign, for example, to automatically opt into home rule if they had a population of over 25,000. The only county that was given home rule written into the Constitution was Cook County, for obvious reasons. It's a huge population. It needs to have that flexibility naturally. But counties, however, are able to opt into home rule if we put it on a public ballot. So that requires 500 signatures. And then it goes on our general ballot. And we can appeal if we so choose 4 years down the road if we have already gotten home rule. So like if we successfully get home rule, if we change our minds and say like this isn't working for us for whatever reason, 4 years later, we can overturn that decision. Is that making a little bit of sense? Okay, cool. Okay, so we've seen what's going on with our state constitution and what explicitly it allows for us. I want to talk a little bit about why you haven't heard home rule, because if this is something, as I've sold it to be so many times, like this magic salve that we can use to lift our neighbors out of poverty, like why aren't more people talking about it? Why aren't we excited about it? Why is this just coming up now? This is for a couple reasons, and many of these are rooted in what I study. I'm writing my dissertation on political rhetoric and local contexts. So this, the Constitution outlines, I'm going to start with the middle point here, powers that are explicitly for the federal government and for the state government, right? I mean, it spends a lot of times, Article 2, Article 1, defining what those powers are. However, local powers are not as well defined. So the phrase that you'll be familiar with is, aside from the states, the rest of the powers are left up to the states and the people. So presumably, we can imagine that the people are local governments. And so that's really what we're talking about here. So to make up for that ambiguity, we have two legal principles that state Supreme Courts and legislatures use to determine what is an appropriate way to use local power. And there are two principles. One is Dillon's law. I'm not going to get too much into it. I'm throwing a lot at you. But that is a restrictive understanding of state government. It means whatever is laid out in the Constitution is exactly what local governments can do and nothing more. Home rule, on the other hand, this is an option that most states have for local governments. It means that a local government can decide how they do or do not want to use those, taxes, et cetera, unless it's explicitly prohibited in the state constitution, just for, as I already outlined. Don't want to repeat myself here. Other reasons why you haven't heard this is because by nature, because it's a local issue, it's determined on a state-by-state basis. So it's hard to have a national conversation, a national dialogue on something that feels so niche and is so inapplicable to every single area. It's hard to educate on larger, even as a state-by-state basis, right? Because these things are interpreted by states, and also if you're a county or a city, etc. The final reason that I want to preview here, and this could possibly be for another forum, but it has always been opposed by conservative groups. I believe 9 counties have tried to get home rule in Illinois. It has been beaten. This is primarily like between the 90s and the 80s where they tried to get home rule on their on the ballot by groups that proposed or that were advocating really in that Tea Party vein, so taxed enough already. They spread concerns that it would mean that we can tax a lot, that it's a scheme, etc. All of these things that by case studies show that this isn't simply true, and we can talk about that more. But I wanted to give you kind of a sense of like why this isn't so embedded in our national conversation, in case you think that we're okay. It's either somewhere in that range. We can also check. But really good point, Jenna. Anybody else want to share? Or anything that did not come up yet? Something that we talked about was, as you mentioned, like homelessness and violence and all these things being looped together, but also like exacerbating the existing problems that we already have, right? So like our poverty rate in Champaign County, as I've been like a broken record about, right, is head and shoulders above every other county or comparable counties, and any other our state average and also our national average, right? It's something that we've known for a long time that we really need to focus on. And something that Benjamin brought up was that these things will, that so many families will get even deeper into poverty, and then we'll also have additional people joining that group. So it's really like an exacerbation, to borrow Shauna's word for it, of the problems that you're already known about for a while. Anybody else? Stephanie, do you have anything that you wanted to add?
No, I think that's good. I think I mean, there's more reasons than this, but there's 4 main reasons that Emily and I have been talking about since she decided to run for office about home rule, and reasons that I've become convinced that we need to do something different in our county, that the way things are going right now just aren't working, and that we need a radical and progressive idea in order to move forward on some of the reasons that we're involved with the county, some of the goals that we really have. So the first one is I'm going to let Emily talk about, but implementing the ideas outlined by the Racial Justice Task Force.
Yes, this is one that, as we know, so many people in our county have dedicated so much time and energy to. We are so used to talking about not building a new jail or lowering our jail numbers, but as we talk in circles, right, about defending that bare minimum, we are evading conversations that could be an actual step forward. Other counties have, or across the nation, have opted on their own to end cash bail. We can do that on our own. We can expand pretrial services on our own. We can even shore up our reentry programs even more on our own. All of these things we can use to fulfill these commitments that we in the conversation that we began with that Racial Justice Task Force, and finally make good on some of those problems. And again, like break out of the circular conversation. It's something I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that on the board that's been the most frustrating for me is the lack of movement on the Racial Justice Task Force. And I do think that there's some things that with a change in membership on the board that we're also working on that can move some of these things forward. But I also think it's really important to recognize we need to identify some dedicated revenue streams. We need to build some teeth behind what the Racial Justice Task Force they gave us a good roadmap, and we need now to get really serious about following that roadmap. The next one is something protecting and promoting a sustainable local environment. There's probably no area that local entities that are progressive use home rule for more than environmental issues. Environmental activists on the local level, typically one of their tools that they use in order to have a local environment that more reflects the values of sustainability and long-term future for our environment is home rule. There's advocacy groups around the country who work on this kind of issue, and this is an area where we could be doing more robust work. Emily mentioned, the possibility of a
Community
plastic
food rights.
bag sales tax, right? And what if we did something like that and then dedicated that revenue stream towards sustainable energy initiatives um, within our community? Those are the kind of things that could open up with home rule. Next, I'm going to give it to Emily.
Also, I just want to tack on there, like that first option that we listed in that, as we went over the powers that home rule would give us, regulatory powers. So we can put restrictions on corporate businesses that are polluting our areas in ways that municipal governments, so Champaign and Urbana, might not be able to do on their own. That's something that we are uniquely positioned to do, and something that's well worth getting excited about. Next, mental and public health in our county. This is one that I care about very deeply. We all know, through my work on the Citizen Police Review Subcommittee, one thing that we see over and over and over again is that the criminal justice system and our police officers in general are the first responders for mental health issues. And we will not break the cycle of poverty or the problems that plague our criminal justice system unless we break that link. So by investing in programs, flooding them with additional revenue streams, we can invest in the long-term health, well-being of our future. We can break finally that generational cycle of poverty. The other thing I want to mention here is access to substance use treatment centers. This is, if you look at the 2015 Community Health Survey, this is one of the top things that was listed alongside community violence. People are lacking access to substance use treatment centers, and that's something that we can allocate additional funding to. We can earmark that specifically for that kind of service. So one issue that we're seeing with substance use treatment centers today, in especially Rosecrans, or only Rosecrans, that's really the major option unless you're going, anyways, we get into the weeds. That you have to, it requires 6 months to 1 year sobriety. And that's generally the wait time. So for somebody who is seeking recovery, that can be a death sentence. The time in which a person is most vulnerable to relapse is that 2-week period. So 6 months to a year, that you're not connecting, it completely defies the purpose of connecting people with treatment center options. And so we can finally overcome that huge barrier that has sustained our poverty rate for so long.
And the last thing is, I don't think it's any secret that right now our economy doesn't work for everybody in Champaign County. As Emily mentioned, and I'm going to talk a little bit about more later, we have high rates of poverty in our county. And home rule can give us some flexible options to think about not just revenue streams, although that's typically what's talked about in home rule, but also policy decisions that could benefit our county without having to wait around for the federal government or the state, right? And I think it's really important here to pause and talk about home rule, how home rule works. Essentially, what home rule does is it gives local bodies of government more flexibility in how they govern and the kind of issues and coming up with local solutions for local problems. Now, that doesn't mean we could just go out and do anything. A real specific and sort of classic example of a limit of home rule in Illinois is we couldn't all of a sudden just change the drinking age in Illinois, say we wanted to make it less or more, because that area has been preempted by the state. And so how all of these different categories would work is, right now I have a lot of ideas on things that if we were home rule today that I would like to start working on. But what we would need to do is we would approach each of these ideas as if they were pieces of local legislation, which would mean that as we were crafting the regulation or the policy or the revenue stream, whatever it may be, underneath the more liberal umbrella of home rule, we would work with different constituency groups. We would work with other board members, right? We would work with members of the public in order to come up with policies that work for Champaign County. So to give you some, just ideas about expanding the economy so that it works for everyone, and just one real basic idea that has really, to me, come to the forefront because of the pandemic is a little while ago, Cook County implemented a policy by which businesses of certain sizes had to provide paid sick leave, right? The reason that they were able to do that on a county level is because they are a home rule county. Could we do something like that here? And in Cook County, you could earn up to 5 days paid sick leave. And of course, there's loopholes. The law isn't perfect. You know, the rule isn't perfect, but it is a step forward. And for a lot of people, it's made a real difference, right, in their take-home revenue and the really difficult decision that people have to make between their personal well-being and their health and their economic well-being. So could we do something like that here? Would that be worthwhile conversation to have? For us to start really having that conversation, first we would need to be home rule. So those are some of the ideas, some of the broad categories of things that are motivating the reason we wanted to bring this forum together. The next thing I wanted to do is just really briefly talk about, well, why now? And I'll be honest, I've been talking about this internally with members of the board since I've been on the board, since 2017. And I sometimes feel like I'm spinning my wheels. The few times I've tried to get it like put onto more of a formal agenda conversation, it's not gone anywhere, right? And I really feel like if we are going to do this, it would need to come from the community and be community driven in concert with county board members. I feel like there's just a few reasons that, for me, the way the county currently is financed, and this has become abundantly clear to me in my time as finance chair and vice chair, is not working. Since the early 1990s, the county has failed to invest in its basic facility and technology needs. We've began to try to turn the tide on that a little bit. In 2016, we came up with a facilities action plan. In 2019, when I was on the board, we came up with a technology plan, both of which involved members of both caucuses to come up with those priorities. But the thing is the backlog is so deep that it's going to take us a while to dig out of that hole. I mean, just to give you just some examples, there's one technology system at the jail that we are the last place in the United States of America that has that system. There are, the way that we make our budgeting software that we are currently in the middle of replacing dates back to the 1970s. I mean, some of the technology issues and you know, big props to Leah Taylor, who helped put that plan together, is they're very expensive. And one of the reasons that they're very expensive is because we've waited so long to do anything about them. Other status of the county is the county has a very difficult time retaining staff. The county executive recently gave us a report just a few nights ago in which she described a 61.3% staff turnover, changing in staff in 1 year. To give you a sense of this, the biggest department, the department that saw the most turnover, was the circuit clerk, who saw a sort of mind-boggling 144% turnover in one department. Now, not all of those people are leaving the county. Some of them are moving, you know, from one job in the county to another. And one of the reasons is they're trying to find a place within the county where they could work and also make ends meet. But what happened in the last year is 1 out of 5 of our employees left the county entirely. And anytime that happens, what we're seeing is institutional knowledge, experience, right, is walking out the door. And also the money that we invest in training the staff, including in some departments where training costs could be very high, especially the sheriff's department, we're making that investment and then they leave. We also have unfunded recommendations from the Racial Justice Task Force. There are several things in there, especially around reforming our criminal justice structure, including pretrial, right? Including more robust and a deeper reentry program that are just simply unfunded right now in our current structure. And then I also want to just briefly talk about the impact of COVID-19 on county finances. Based on our most recent estimate that was provided, 11.8% of revenue shortfalls is predicted in 2020. What the county executive has recommended, and none of this is set in stone yet. It will be worked out, you know, throughout the summer. But recommendations for what we're going to do about that shortfall going into 2021 include working with elected officials and department heads to identify potential expenditure reductions, delaying $700,000 of facility capital projects this year and half of all of the scheduled projects next year, which again, as I just said, we're already behind, decades behind on our facility projects, and this will only continue that delay. Asking departments to reduce their budgets by 4% across the board, staff furloughs, asking countywide elected officials to give part back of their very large salaries, and the proposal that is currently on the table that I said that I am against is cutting reentry completely for 2021. So even the small piecemeal programs that we are doing now in terms of making a more progressive criminal justice system in our county are on the chopping block because of the COVID situation. If you add to that the Carl decision that it so far has gone against the county, that's another $500,000 hit to our general fund. And then even before COVID-19, there were significant cuts that came from the state on revenue streams, including a 5% cut on income taxes that we receive from the state, different cuts in some of our courts and services fees, the percentages that we pay for administration of those monies from the state, all of which have added up to six-figure losses to our county budget. Finally, and I want to reiterate this, nearly 1 in 5 residents of our county live below the poverty line. That means that our county isn't working for everybody. And I think if we're going to do something about that, we need to start talking about progressive, bold, new ideas, because the current structure that we have right now isn't working. So that's one of the reasons, some of the reasons that this issue is so important. And we wanted to start, what we wanted today to be is to start a conversation. Like Emily really well outlined at the beginning, people just don't typically know what home rule is. It's not something that's talked about. And we recognize that if we're going to start a conversation and start to even seriously consider this, we need to start talking now and having that conversation. So we wanted to use this opportunity to sort of start what we know is going to be a much longer talk in our county. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But with that, we wanted to open it up to questions from everybody, because I feel like we threw a lot of information at it.
Yes. So we have the, if you're feeling shy, you can put your question in the chat, or you can submit it through that Google form, or we are happy to open the floor.
Yeah. You could do the little raise your hand button thing, and we'll call on you.
Go for it, Benjamin.
Well, one thing that just keeps on swimming in my head, listening to all this, especially when you mention taxes and powers and liberal, agendas, is the insane amount of pushback and opposition that's going to come from every local city, not just Champaign. Urbana will probably be on board, but in some ways, it depends on how much power, that takes from them. But all the little towns, all the little town mayors, all the little town school districts, they're going to show up and they're going to raise hell that, they're going to be taxing money out of their little districts to pay for programs that the city's going to be using. And, I see a fight. I don't know how you picture it being where you're at.
So this is a good question that comes up a lot. It's actually a misconception. So the state constitution allows cities to preempt, like they have a broader authority. So they can choose a different standard than what the county is offering. We are simply raising the floor, not limiting the ceiling. Does that make a little bit of sense?
And to piggyback on that, let me go back to my example about Cook County and the paid leave, right? So the paid medical leave that they implemented in Cook County. Other jurisdictions that were home rule could then opt out. And quite a few of cities have. Dozens of cities have said, we don't want to do what Cook County is doing, and they opted out. But what had happened is first of all, those local cities had to vote on that. It gave their constituents a chance to give feedback and participate in that process, right? And so it isn't all of Cook County that now has that benefit, because those other home rule counties or home rule entities opted out. But it set a conversation, and it moved that Cook County closer, right, to providing to requiring that companies provide paid medical leave. Now, the other thing is, I think that it is very, very important to recognize that every revenue stream is different, and how those work, we would have to very closely work with our state representatives to ensure the state has preemptive authority on a lot of different things. And so, even right now with our taxes, sometimes we only are able as a county to tax unincorporated areas. In other cases, we get a cut across the board. And it really depends on the way that revenue possibility is set up by state statute. So it would be a very, very case-by-case issue. But what it would not be is that we would be, raising taxes on the cities to pay for. In fact, I would argue that it's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Right now, our 1 cent sales tax, which is one of our major revenue streams for the county, 60% of that comes from 10 businesses. That is not a good way to fund a county, right? If one of those businesses has a bad time, the impact that reverberates through the county. So what home rule does is it allows us to think more just in different ways about what revenue streams are available, and to really work with the community to come up with revenue streams that are, I would argue, more fair.
Yes.
But that's a great question.
It is a great question. I see Brody Dunn has his hand raised. We're gonna unmute you, or you got it? Cool. Oh, I have to unmute, okay. Brody?
Hello, you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, excellent. So I'm curious, when you say, for instance, these places in Cook County that have opted out, these cities, are they opting out of the structure of taxation, or are they opting out of the county's ability to regulate them or tax them?
Specifically, in that they are opting out of the specific regulation. So Cook County passed a regulation around businesses having to provide paid sick leave. And there were caveats, certain size businesses, certain, and then individual cities were like, we also are home rule and we don't want that here. So they opted out of that specific regulation.
So again,
okay.
bring Stephanie's point back around, this forces a conversation. Like, okay, if you don't want to mandate 5 days paid sick leave, justify that to your constituents. Explain to them why.
Right. So if Champaign County, this is really important, went home rule, that wouldn't take away the home rule rights of the other entities that already have it. And what it would do is mean that those local policy discussions could happen at the county level and at the city levels where they already have home rule. But in no way could the county ever, we don't have the ability, or nor do we want to impact their home rule status.
Yes. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat. So Michelle asks, am I understanding that one of the concerns correctly, that with a strong liberal majority on the county board, we may be able to pass progressive ordinances and resolutions, but without home rule, the concern is how do we fund? And I think this is, think here, how to answer this. Stephanie, do you have an immediate response?
Yeah, I think it's both things, right? I think, first of all, right now, we could pass things like, that are, for example, say we wanted, there was an environmental issue that we wanted to speak on. We could rhetorically pass a resolution, right? right now that says we think that this is important and that we care about it as a county. We couldn't do anything in terms of, it would be much more difficult for us to do anything in terms of a policy that would actually impact that, right? But it is also, revenue streams that are targeted to specific issues that we identify. So I think it's both. I think it's, right now we can do a lot of things. I mean, I'll be honest, one of the most frustrating things that I hear on the county board from other county board members is the following statement. There's state statute that tells us what we could do as county board members, and this thing that you're talking about is not part of that statute. I mean, this is what I hear all the time about the Racial Justice Task Force. This is not one of our, statutory requirements, so why are we doing this, right? That is the number one excuse I hear for inaction on progressive issues across the board. And so I think that home rule is not going to solve all of that, but it moves us to a place where we can begin solving local problems more effectively.
I think this is a great point. I want to tack on a little bit. To put this in a really specific example, the point that I want to make is that this would allow, we are at risk to regress. Our county will take steps backwards where we are right now. But what's more is that with home rule, it allows our conversations to move from what we can't do and what we don't want to happen to what can we do? What do we want to see in the future? And one really clean-cut example of this, to get to what Stephanie's saying with teeth, is let's say that we want to consider becoming a sanctuary county. Right now, we would pass a resolution and nothing would really get done with it. But with home rule, we have regulatory power. We can fund specific things like a legal defense fund. These are all ways that we could actually become a sanctuary county instead of just a name only. It looks like you're on mute, Stephanie.
Okay. I see that Brenda, the awesome Brenda Koning, asked a question. If home rule passed, what would happen if Democrats lose county board majority? Could home rule be undone? If not, what would happen to allocations if Republicans or another party or coalition becomes dominant in the future or far future in county politics? I think this is a great question, and it's one I've heard a lot. The thing about home rule is that it is more flexible in order to respond to local issues at a local level. But that means that there needs to be long-term community investment in those issues and elected officials that represent those issues. So if, as Emily said earlier, home rule can be brought up in 4 years and taken away by ballot measure, but it is true that if it does give the local county government more ability to respond to local issues, it will matter who are in those seats of county government. So yes, it would matter who those representatives are, because they would be the people who are bringing those issues to the table in order to address them. So if they're, I think that's an important
Sorry,
point.
I'm just excited and I keep cutting you off. But the other thing I want to tack on here is that, Tom Kasich has pointed this out. Jim Day has pointed this out. We have had a solid decade of progressive wins. We now have leadership from the county party that is steady and that is progressive. We have a more progressive county board than what we have ever had in the past. Let's run up the score, let's do something with that. And we can trust ourselves, right? We can trust our neighbors and our ability to turn out our precincts and continue to make progressive change. We can defend this position by, if we so choose, finding another nominee for county executive. These are all things that we can take up. The other thing that I would add here, let's see here, about trust. I lost the point. I'm sure it'll come up again, but essentially that would be my response to that. Just trust ourselves, get excited about things. Okay, the next one here. Brenda, did that answer your question in full? I think that you have a couple parts. Yes, Republicans. Oh, okay. I do remember what I was going to add here. As we said, if home rule would force a discussion. So let's say that we have, you know, a handful of progressive changes that we now have under our belts. A Republican majority then would have to make the case to the county. We want to take away paid parental leave. We want to end or we want to reinstate cash bail, and like have fun getting that over the line, like with build programs, not jails. Like we can fight tooth and nail if we get another, for whatever reason, say a fluke happens and we get a Republican majority. I see Benjamin has his hand up. Oh.
Yeah, kind of a technical question on the local home rule of which localities actually have home rule for their cities as opposed to like the villages and whatnot.
So the default is any locality and or municipality, and by that I mean towns in a city and cities, so like townships, etc. If they have a population over 25,000, the state constitution allows them to, or they have opted into home rule. So Champaign has home rule, Urbana has home rule. There are some cities that have seen efforts to become non-home rule units. The vast majority of challenges, I believe there's been 18 over the past decade. I think one or two have decided to take it off. And an example that I've looked at, I've watched this city council meeting like at least twice for Batavia, Illinois. Something that they pointed out was that like 20% of their budget they got from home rule status. Like, I kind of got off, topic there with the last example, but in general, yes. So like most cities and localities have it, and they are happy with it, and they want to maintain it. Did that get at your question?
Well, I think the thing I'm wondering is, you know, say if Savoy or, I don't know, Tolono, if they don't have home rule already, I don't know if they do or not, but if they're looking to fight this, is it something where they can opt into home rule themselves as little towns and villages, or is it something where every fight's going to come to the county board on this?
So as far as, I mean, I believe that they are, again, like it would have been a headline earning event if Tolono or another city around us would have opted out of home rule. So I think that there was one, I think it was Rantoul, that came on the ballot to take off home rule status, and that measure lost. But if, let's say, so first, I don't think that any city in our county has decided to get off of home rule. I'm not sure about the ones that are under 25,000. This is something I can follow up with later. But yeah, they could totally decide to do home rule. Yes, Stephanie?
The other thing is, I think it's really important to note that there are wide swaths of county authority that only cover unincorporated areas. So, you know, I'm on the Environment and Land Use Committee, and one of our major pushes is that we passed a solar farm ordinance, right? It's something that we've spent hours and hours and hours on, and we passed a solar farm ordinance for zoning of solar farms. That only applies, that ordinance only covers unincorporated areas, right? So on each thing that we think about, the conversation we would have to have is, would that policy only impact unincorporated areas, or would it be across the board in the county? And in my understanding, it would depend very much on the type of policy it was and what state statute says about that kind of authority. So it would be a very, very case by case basis. And some of the things that we'd want to do would only apply to the unincorporated areas. But here's the thing that I think also could be really cool is, you know, I have really decent working relationships with both mayors in Urbana and Champaign. They're both already home rule. If we had ideas that were progressive and that we think could make a more fair and just and equitable county, what would be great is if we tried to pass it simultaneously in the county, in Urbana, and in Champaign, and worked with all three different agencies working in concert together for sort of a regional approach. And I think that that would be a really exciting thing. And right now,
already this is, okay, Wayne's probably like, that's a wrong date. Okay, so in general, what we need to do There are two different options to get something on the ballot. The first is to get to the county board. Stephanie will tell you that is a non-starter. What we can do, this is what the statute allows us to do in the county code. We can get it on the ballot just by running a petition drive that gets 500 signatures. And that seems like a low number, right? It seems so easy based on what we've accomplished in the past. But the thing is that it's going to take a significant amount of effort for a couple reasons. Obviously, this effort is going to be complicated by the pandemic, right? Like, we need to think about how to petition in a way that is responsible and does not put people at additional risk. But just like as our businesses have had to adapt, democracy should also have to adapt. We don't get to sit this one out because of a lack of resolve or creativity. I know that the state party is thinking of recommendations for how we can do petitions responsibly. I also know that the county party is working on that. But in general, I mean, like, if you look at what the Urbana Farmers Market in the Square, is doing, like, they worked with CU Public Health to put together protocols that would allow them to keep their farmers market open, right, and still keep people safe. So all of this is possible, but that's the first kind of barrier that we would have to overcome. Stephanie, I see you unmute. Do you want to add?
Yeah, Wayne just actually put in the chat that it's actually August 3rd. So it's a little bit better than we thought.
Yeah, he and I got into an exchange about this, and he's like, "No, you're wrong." I'm like, "No, I'm right." No, that's where the slippage came in. Okay, so we've gone over the first one, and that is a petition drive that makes sense. The next one is that we've got to gear up because we are going to see a massive opposition campaign for this. They are going to put out YouTube videos, misinformation campaigns about and scare tactics about what we will use this for, that will rely on false information. So starting a public conversation, that's something we're trying to start here in this public forum, this town hall, on what we can do with home rule, what is at risk that we might regress, and what we can do with our conversation moving forward, right? Again, like, we can move from a culture of I can't and you can't do that to we can take steps forward. We can move from defense to offense and actually make neighborhoods better.
And I guess I just want to say, just to follow up on that, I think we have something special going on in Champaign County. I think that, what happened in 2018 was pretty amazing in terms of pushing the county in a more progressive direction. And I think that what we can become, and I'm not just saying this facetiously, we could become a national model on how counties deal with issues of criminal justice, with how counties deal with issues of building a clean environment, and how counties deal with issues on protecting the rights of workers and working class families, right? But in order to do that, we have to have the toolbox. And right now, it's like we have a toolbox that's missing a lot of tools. Yep. And when I think about home rule, that's what I think about. It puts more tools. Doesn't give us all the tools, right? It doesn't mean that every single solution can come from the home rule umbrella. But what it does is it means that the kind of conversations that we have and the ideas that we can talk about and the solutions that we could come up with are way more robust than what currently is happening on a county level. And so we have put a tremendous amount of effort to get good, progressive folks into the spots to represent this community. We've taken an intense amount of effort to hear what the community wants through things like the Racial Justice Task Force, where community members came together and for dozens and dozens of hours invested in their time and their talent and their energy putting a plan together. Well, let's do it, right? To me, this is the moment where we say, what do we want to be at Champaign County, right? And that's why I think home rule, that this is the moment where we start having this conversation.
I just want to do snaps for that was fire, Stephanie. That's the best, most concise way of phrasing the possibilities. Thank you for that.
Brody's hand is back up.
Oh, okay. Go for it. We just need to unmute.
Okay, so this is from a while back, so it's not totally relevant to this current conversation, but I'm curious.
Go for it, sorry.
Hello?
Yeah, I interrupted you for a joke, but it wasn't even very funny. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm curious. So let's say, home rule passes and Savoy opts out. They opt out of home rule, and the county board implements a program, and it's funded by whatever property tax on homes over $2 million or something like that. Are the constituents, by opting out, has the city of Savoy deprived their constituents of that program?
You mean of the program that was funded by that option, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, if Savoy opted out of home rule, what it would mean is that they could not then pass a regulation that limited a specific regulation that the county passed, right? So, but also it would depend on what the issue was and if we even had jurisdiction in the first place over Savoy. So a lot of the authority of the county only covers unincorporated areas. Some things that's not the case. So it'd be, I don't want to speculate on a specific thing. That's why I was saying, like, it's almost like we have to think about this as like a legislative type of deal where, like, if a piece of legislation passes the state, there's all sorts of input that goes into it. So anything that we did, whether it be statutory or identifying a revenue stream, what we would have to do is figure out where does our authority lie for this specific issue? Like who do we as county board members represent on this, and that is not uniform depending on the issue. And then
right.
And then what do we want to do about it? So it would vary, I guess is what I'm saying, in terms of Savoy status. I don't know if that answers. That may not be the best.
Oh no,
answer.
that absolutely answers my question. I will tack on a question onto the end of that. I'm very sorry. Does that mean that like the legal department in like this hypothetical scenario would need to have way more funds than it currently has?
Right.
We have a competent county executive that I'm sure would love to head up that effort. And also, I mean, a department, we have staff that, yeah, but of course, like, okay, so Stephanie's like, no, that's not entirely correct. Okay, so to be a home rule county, you also have to adopt the county executive form of government, right? And so that is because they would take on some of that extra labor to vet solutions, since we are checked out in that way.
Okay, cool.
The other thing that I want to tack on here, I'm not sure if this is your question or if I can sneak it in there. But like, for example, if, okay, Savoy were to opt out of home rule, just like Batavia did, they thought about doing that. It came up on referendum. I think that they eventually opted out. I'm sorry, that public question did not pass. One thing that they had to educate residents on and voters on was that they would lose 20% of their budget because 20% of their budget relied on home rule powers.
Interesting.
I'll put that case study in the chat. But Benjamin, I see another question.
Yeah, as far as intergovernmental agreements go, I mean, a lot of the revenue that comes in for a lot of programs at the city level, depends on grants, either federal or state, or federal backed state grants or organizational things. It sounds like this could actually open up the county to new revenue streams to help support things that we're already trying to work with local governments on, like reentry, but the county is more limited in what it can actually do right now. Would this actually open up more federal grants and revenue streams for stuff like the reentry council? I ask because I'm a citizen representative.
Yeah, we do already get quite a lot of federal grant monies through the Regional Planning Commission. That body does most of the, our federal granting, not all, but most. But it definitely, home rule definitely does give us more ability to enter into IGAs and to work with other home rule entities. And, you know, I haven't done enough research to find out if there are particular federal revenue streams that only go to home rule. But I think that's a great question. And I would be very interested in looking into that more. I don't know that part of the answer to the question, but like if there are any grants that have that caveat, I don't know. But I used to be a grant writer, so that's like the kind of question that used to write a lot of federal grants. That's something I'd be really interested in finding out.